Professor Irani was born to Zoroastrian parents. From a very young age, he was greatly influenced by his father, who had translated the poetry of Zarathustra and imparted his teachings to his sons. He is a very well-known figure in the worldwide Zoroastrian community, and throughout his life he has served this community very well. Professor Irani has published numerous papers on the teachings of Zarathustra and has organized over 20 seminars and conferences on this topic. He has served as a member of the board of Zoroastrian Association of Greater New York for many years and as its president for one term. And he has received numerous awards and honors from the Zoroastrian community for his services. In this part, Professor discusses the teachings of Zarathustra. Could you tell us who was Zarathustra and what is Zoroastrianism? What is the difference between these two?
Zarathustra, as we say, is the prophet of ancient Iran. By prophet, we mean the founder of a new religion. He did not prophesy anything, but he was a teacher of a new religious vision. Now, he lived sometime in the middle of the second millennium BCE and was a member of the Iranian tribes who were very closely connected with the Indian tribes, a whole group of tribes who were generally referred to as the Indo-Iranians. They had nature divinities, divinities for the sun, moon, the rivers, rain, and so on. Zarathustra preached a religion which was distinctly different from this. He declared that there was only one divinity, the wise Lord, Ahura Mazda. Ahura means Lord, and Mazda means wise. And according to Zarathustra, this is the vision of the world. The wise Lord created an ideal, perfect order. This is the fundamental creation. It's called Asha, which literally means truth. It's the ideal truth about what existence should be. This ideal was then transformed into the real tangible world. When this world was created, it was supposed to, it was in time now. The tangible world is in time. It would unfold and evolve according to Asha and become perfect. But that's not what happened. The implementation of Asha was thwarted by the spirit which says no. And here is the fundamental dualism of Zoroastrianism. There is one spirit. By spirit I don't mean personality. I mean some kind of non-material force which promotes Asha. It's called Spentaminyu, and the other which frustrates or opposes the realization of Asha, called Angraminyu. And so the world that we see, which was meant to be perfect, turns out to be flawed, imperfect, contaminated. This is the picture of the world that he gives us. There is a way of life which emerges from this. And that comes in the following way. We are blessed with the good mind, Bahu Mana. Bahu means good, Mana is mind. And this mind enables us to recognize the flawed world. We can see what Asha is, we can recognize what the ideal is, we can see in every situation that we encounter to what extent the ideal is flawed. This disparity gives us reason to act. We are also blessed with another aspect of Ahura Mazda called Spenta Armaiti, the spirit of devotion or right-mindedness. It inspires us to do the right thing, and the right thing is to change any flawed situation and bring it closer to Asha. This is the good life. So the great difference between the early religion, which was a religion of devotion, sacrifice, offering, prayer, asking for this or that benefit, this is replaced by a different conception. One lives according to the divine wish by actualizing Asha as far as we can. And this act, the righteous act, the act of promoting righteousness, is the primary religious act of worship.
At least according to Zarathustra.
According to Zarathustra. And this is what we find in the verses, the gathas, which were the hymns composed by Zarathustra. In the time of Zarathustra, his disciples, the priests Ashramans, the promoters of Asha, were merely teachers and guides.
So in a sense, counselors.
Yes, but religious preceptors. And gradually this changed, and the ritualist priests entered, and many centuries later Zoroastrianism became a substantially ritualized religion. But the original message of Zarathustra, Zarathustra was not compromised. This is the major difference.
So while the original message was kept, other things were added onto it.
That's right, right.
How did Zarathustra perceive the divine? I mean, you mentioned Ahura Mazda.
Ahura Mazda is the divinity. As the name implies, he is the wise Lord. It is the source of all creation, and its characteristic is that it is good. All goodness comes from Ahura Mazda.
Are we employees of Ahura Mazda?
No, we are his friends and associates.
So Ahura Mazda on his own or its own cannot bring about the perfect physical world.
Let's put it this way, that is not, yes, Ahura Mazda does not by a fiat eliminate evil. I think Zarathustra's idea is that evil is not eliminated by a command. It is very intrinsic to the nature of reality. It perishes when it is not chosen. And the agents of choice are we, human beings. We, upon reflection, decide that this is not the right way, this is the way. And when all of us will have seen through this evil, and all of us choose only the right and not the wrong, then he will perish.
Okay, so in that sense, we are the agents of choice.
Yes.
And by choosing right, we will eliminate evil.
God does not judge us. The judgment is a consequence of what we have done. And it's certainly not a situation where we ask for God's mercy. That sort of thing has no role in Zarathustra's thinking at all.
So in a sense, what you're saying is Ahura Mazda created this system, and this system now operates.
And he created it with goodness and justice within. And it operates, yes. The moral principles function. But the creation of Asha is an interesting theme. Asha are principles or regulations, and this is the only creation. What God created, even in this material world, are really certain principles and rules which lie at the bottom of things. He did not create water and fire and air and stone and so on. Just the principles.
How was the universe created, according to Zarathustra?
He merely tells us there were two creations. One was Asha, and the second was the materialization of it, which is the material, the tangible world. And in that we have both the promotion of the order and the opposition to it.
So Ahura Mazda said, let there be Asha, and there was Asha.
That's right.
And then Ahura Mazda said, let there be the physical, and there was partially physical.
And the physical world, and there was within it this spirit which says no.
How did that imperfection creep in?
We are not told. I don't think Zarathustra spent much time over it. He was by nature not a metaphysician who asked the origins of things. He was a moralist. He was overpoweringly a moralist. And he saw things in moral terms. His major interest was not the universe, that is just the framework. His interest was the social order.
All right, so maybe this is a good place for us to go into the most controversial part of Zoroastrianism, or the most misunderstood part of Zarathustra's philosophy, and that is the question of duality.
Yes.
What is it all about? Why so much confusion?
Oh, that's really very understandable. What happened was Zarathustra's conception is what we have already talked about, that in this world there are two forces. Let me use the term vectors, to use this kind of term from physics. The analogy is good. One vector is that which promotes Asha, the other frustrates it. This we find in nature and most clearly in society. Unfair social orders, tyrannical rulers, tribal chiefs engaged in depredations and so on. This is clear evil. Zarathustra sees it, he attacks it in several of his verses. There aren't two divinities in the vision of Zarathustra. There are only two moral forces, two moral vectors.
So let me see if I get it right. What Zarathustra said is that there are two opposing vectors or forces, and what is behind those forces he wasn't concerned with.
That's right.
The fact that there were those two forces was what he concerned himself with.
Yes.
Imagine I'm a 6-year-old and I'm talking to Zarathustra, and Zarathustra wants to tell me about this duality. What would Zarathustra say to me?
Just this, that when you encounter a situation, think about it. And if you think about it calmly and objectively, you will learn, or you will become aware of the fact that this is the right thing to do. And this is not the right thing to do. This is what my father told me when I was about 6 or 7, that listen carefully to your voice of conscience and it will tell you what the good is. This is what Zarathustra tells us. Of course, this voice can be gradually refined.
Or eroded.
That's true too, yes. But there is this conviction that there is a right order in ideal existence. It is there. You have the power to recognize it. You can be in contact with it. And you do have the strength of character to put it in operation.
Does everybody have that ability?
Everybody. Perhaps maybe with variation of degree, but everybody has it. We corrupt it when we put self-interest above the truth.
Self-interest above the truth.
Yes. That is the big source of corruption.
So the main teaching of Zarathustra really is put truth before self-interest.
That's right. And truth is, to act according to truth is righteousness. And this is the celebrated Ashembo prayer, which says that righteousness is the highest virtue. Not self-preservation, not self-aggrandizement, not even kindness or compassion, and so on, but righteousness. And if you are righteous, it gives you illumined happiness. For him or her who does right for the sake of right, not for some advantage of one kind or another. And that is a simple, beautifully constructed prayer, hence recited in the Zoroastrian tradition over and over again.
Is it fair to say that if I grasp the essence of this prayer, I've grasped the essence of the teachings of Zarathustra?
Yes, the central teaching, yes.
So the heroic life is a life of good thoughts, good words, and
exactly.
good deeds.
And the pious life.
And the pious life. And that is what brings happiness, genuine, illumined happiness.
Yes.
But what I see as good is not what you see as good.
But there is ultimately only one good, Asha. Maybe there may be variations in perception, because we may perceive things from different perspectives. And this is why we need good thoughts, good words. Because I need to express my point of view to you and need to hear the expression of your point of view and at least comprehend, so that I act in a way in which I may not jeopardize the good that you are looking at. This is what socializes us. And ultimately, action must be socially responsible.
So my advocacy of my good conscience is necessary but not sufficient.
That's right. That's right.
So militancy in my approach is not necessarily good.
No, that can be too excessive and miss out on good words. Good words is not just uttering them, it's also listening to them.
Because words are in the air,
That's
whether
right.
it goes out or comes in.
Yes.
When is the end of time?
When all evil will be wiped out.
What happens to us when we are gone?
That is not discussed in the...
What does
Zarathustra
say?
merely says that we'll be in a state of best consciousness. We'll be in a state of the abode of songs.
And what is this bridge of the separator?
This is the myth.
Is that
but
in the
it
Gathas?
appears in the Gathas, yes. The Chinnavad Pareto, the bridge of judgment, or the bridge of the separator. Nothing more is said about it. Zarathustra says about the good people, I shall forth with them pass over the bridge of judgment.
This is what Zarathustra says.
Says, yes, in the Gathas. The idea is that your own goodness in life enables you to cross or to fall by the wayside. And if one falls, the notion of heaven is it's the dark house of the lie.
Hell is that.
That's hell. And when one falls, he says, the soul, alas, alas, will be its final cry. That's all Zarathustra tells us.
But if that is the house of falsehood, that's all he says?
That's all he says.
Alas, alas, the house of falsehood?
He occasionally says it's a place of darkness
What does that mean?
And foul. These are metaphorical expressions.
Symbolizing what?
Symbolizing a state of disharmony, disintegrity, obvious exposure to conflict.
That can only exist if there is time.
That's right, in this hell, which is a temporal state, from which one will be relieved finally when all is purified. Yes.
And heaven is
the abode of songs, or the state of best consciousness.
Which symbolizes
a kind of perfection. Although there are, in one verse, Zarathustra says, I revere thee with all my spiritual strengths, with all the powers of truth and the good mind, I approach thee, with songs of my praise. And then says, and at the last, when I shall stand at thy gate, I shall hear the echo of my songs from thy abode of song.
So I enter your house.
That's right.
I become your guest.
Something like that. I come in the presence of this supreme consciousness.
Do I become one with it? Does he say anything to that effect?
He doesn't say that. But he talks of this kind of presence, which is, well, in those days, how could one express it to people? Just think of it. These were warriors, peasants, herdsmen, and so on. Somehow he wanted to communicate this inspiration. And that he did. This is probably the most personal verse.
You mentioned Frashakarati, the ultimate...
the final renovation.
The final renovation. That is the end of the universe, according to Zarathustra.
End of history.
The purpose of existence.
That's right. It's fulfilled now.
So what is my purpose in life?
Improve this world, move it along in the right direction. We are needed for the arrival of Frashakarati. We have to do this work. It will come, because ultimately no one who sees falsehood as falsehood can believe it. This is the asymmetry between truth and falsehood. When you see something as true, you cannot help but believe it. When you see something as false, you cannot help but disbelieve it. But
so they are not just the opposite sides of the same coin.
No. But as these fellows pointed out, the evil spirit is not just falsehood. It is the deceptive power which hides the falsity of falsehood.
So I can not lie yet be false.
That's right.
By hiding truth.
But what has happened is that the lie has taken over your conscience.
So there is such a thing as lying by omission.
Oh yes. And this is the I don't remember one ancient priest who writes that we have to be constantly vigilant in exercising our conscience, that it does not fall within the orbit of self-deception.
How do I choose?
Choose what? The first choice is the choice that Aura Mazda is, the real Ahu, that is the real Lord, that is the one whose direction is worthy of acceptance. 2, if you reflect, you accept the message. This is, of course, an element in the Gathas. And 3, that if this is done by enough people, there will be a structure of society in which we will have an authority protecting the dispossessed. But that could be, as you say, anyone, or maybe it might even be collective.
I am back to my 6-year-old phase, and I am facing a situation. How do I choose? What do I choose? Any given situation. Do I choose to act? Do I choose not to act? Do I choose to react?
No, first ask yourself, the first question always is this situation how it should be? Or to put it in the language of the Gathas, is this in accordance with Asha? Is Asha realized there?
And if it is?
And if it is, fine.
You let it be.
Then you let it be, and if it, at all possible, you enjoy it. If not, you ask what it should be and articulate that and bring this about. The responsibility is an extremely heavy responsibility that Zarathustra places upon us. There are innumerable things which are not as they should be. And we are not really able, not having energy enough to sustain an effort to improve everything. But we do our best.
How would you fight evil?
First, above all, identify it, articulate it, and then in discourse isolate it, so that in our possible ways of acting we can see that this is something we don't want.
Identify, articulate, and isolate.
And that's not all that difficult if you become clear in your mind.
You mentioned earlier that it is the soul who makes the choices.
That's right.
Tell us more about the soul. What is the soul?
It is the term in the Gothic and the Avestan tradition is the Urvan. It is actually the identity of the self in the body. This is the I. It is the I which perceives, the I which judges, and the I which decides. Together with all the faculties we have, material and spiritual.
And so you said that we are responsible for the things that we choose.
Yes.
Well, this obviously would come from the chain of causality.
No, from the chain of choice. This is a spiritual conception. It is put in a causal way that the consequence of our moral choices will be what we will receive. But the consequence, although put in causal terms, is not physical or mechanical causality. If you like, it is a moral causality. What is it? I don't know, but there is a constant reference in the Gathas where Zarathustra says, by your wisdom, by your ways, it refers to Ahura Mazda, that this is something that Ahura Mazda has established, which none can escape.
So whatever I choose, I will face its consequences.
That's right.
And is everything that I'm facing the consequence of a choice that I've made?
Ultimately.
Then why does bad thing happen to good people?
In this world, this world is an infected world. This world is contaminated. The regularity which we would expect in a perfectly good moral world is not there. And this is Zarathustra's complaint. What has happened here? And he ascribes this to the what he calls the ultimate spirit of deceit. Says this and this and this. Is this from this source, or is it the ultimate deceiver?
Which is?
Which is the evil spirit, so to speak.
But Zarathustra never personalized that.
No, but the phrase here is ultimate deceiver looks as if it's a person, but he doesn't do that in theory. There is no escape from the irrelevance of things that happen to us. Some good, some bad.
So the only hope Zarathustra gives us is basically that if we do this, the end of time will come sooner.
That's right.
Than later.
Certainly, yes. And if you act rightly, you will have this inner peace and content.
Even though you may be subjected to this outer turmoil.
Right, right.
Is there reincarnation in Zarathustra's teachings?
No. He merely says that we go to this state of best consciousness or the state of worst consciousness, best consciousness in the house of song, worst consciousness in the darkness of the house of the lie. You transform into some state of consciousness. You don't come back here.
Does Zarathustra say anything about union of man and woman?
No, he doesn't. He talks about marriage in the last Gatha, Vaishtaishti, which is a Gatha of advice, but that was composed and recited by Zarathustra on the occasion of the wedding of his youngest daughter. And it is instructive, where he tells her that you are the youngest daughter of this particular family and that family, the two branches of family. Here is the person who is a worthy, responsible person, a believer in our faith and so on. And he would be a worthy husband to you. So now take advice of your good mind and make a proper choice.
So he lets her choose.
He lets her choose. And he makes a big point of this. This is a theme which comes over and over in the Gathas. On all significant matters, you have to make the choice. You have to be clear that you are making the choice and bear the responsibility. And she says, I have now reflected and I choose this person as a worthy person to whom I shall marry, and I shall respect him, I shall respect my family, I shall respect his family, and so on. And then he says, now the two of you together, you each try to outdo the other in goodness.
So if there's anything you compete with,
it is this. It is this. And boy, when people get married, they do compete. And if they do it in goodness and not in terms of barbs or something or other by which they put down each other or something, this is worthy. And he says, and this cherishing of the other will be your good fortune and will lead to a worthy end. But most importantly, let's recognize that Zarathustra tells his daughter that that is her choice. Now consult with your good mind and then make a choice.
Not with your mother or father or...
No. That's
but with your good mind.
But look at the contrast. This is exactly what was going on in Indo-European societies. It was the parent who gave the daughter
He doesn't make any distinction between husband or wife, man or woman.
No, he doesn't. For him, there's utter equality between the sexes.
And not only that, there is no distinction for ages either. You just said that he said this on the occasion of his youngest daughter's wedding.
Yes.
Not the oldest daughter,
No,
not the sons that he had.
And she must have been a pretty young woman, because the Gatha was composed somewhere in the middle period of his life. And this being the youngest daughter, she must have been really quite young. But he explicitly tells her that now you make the choice.
Let's talk about this development, the historical development of the scripture. So we started with the Gathas during Zarathustra. And then what happened?
The two major scriptural documents are the Yasna, which I think was composed over a period of about 1,000 years. It has 72 chapters. This chapter, that chapter were added now and then and so on. It contains the Gathas. It contains the prayer of the 7 chapters, the Yasna Haptangaiti, placed between the first chapter of the Gathas and the second chapter.
Is there a significance to 72? 72 seems to be a holy number.
When I think this 72 hours or chapters was established, then it became a sacred number. I think, I'm not sure. But anyway, these were important prayers, and therefore the purpose was of this kind of liturgy was so that every priest would memorize it. There was no writing at that time. The other prayers were the yashts. The yashts are hymns of praise, which have no equivalence in any earlier Zoroastrian material, but which probably were pre-Zarathustra prayers. And these were for veneration of the various pre-Zarathustra divinities, the divinity of the sun, the rain, of the pure waters, of the rivers, etc., etc. And they don't have this reflective religious notion which Zarathustra had. And then came the Vandita, the book that I'm talking about, which was composed probably by collecting an opinion or opinions of the priestly class, the Magi, who were the priestly clan of the Medes, not of the Persians. But the Medes and Persians jointly constituted the Iranians. And they were technically proficient in performing ritual and also in medical work. The Magi were not just priests, they were also physicians and surgeons.
So instead of poet priests, they were doctor priests.
Now doctor priests, yes.
Or healer priests.
And they, one thing that they insisted on was purity. I think they had got the idea that the major causes of illness were contagions. And they came from dead bodies, particularly during epidemics and so on. And there were tremendously carefully formulated requirements of handling corpses, dead bodies and so on, treatment of them. And this is what we find in that book. This is the book that was preserved, most of the material that was lost during the Arab invasion, because it was the most practical book. It contains practical instruction for purification, also for enforcement of contracts, also for punishments for crimes, for medical practice, and so on.
I guess when there is war going on, you don't have much time for reflection. You have to deal with the realities of life.
Right, right. And this is what absorbed the priesthood from the 9th century to the 19th century more than anything else. This is what the religion requires to do. Vendida.
And the doctrines of the Vendida.
That's right. And you have to practice this and you have to practice that, and this is impure and that is impure, and so on.
So the official parts were the yasna, which included the gathas.
The gathas.
The yashts.
The yash. A visperad, which was a combination of the yasna with some smaller prayers for recitation on important seasonal days,
Yes.
marking the shifts in the seasons, what are called the gambars.
Yes.
And
And the Vendida.
and there were minor prayers for this or that.
What is the Avesta? Which is
The
more, most
Avesta
people
is
are
the language, and it starts with the gathas, which is the earliest Avesta, then the yasna, the 72 verses, and most of the yashts. That is the Avesta. The Vendida is in Pahlavi. Out of piety, they retranslated it from Pahlavi back to the Avestan language. But when they did it, they were not fluent in Avesta, and so they made a series of grammatical mistakes.
So there's no book per se called the Avesta.
No.
Okay.
No. It's the collection in that language.
The collection of all of these scriptural works is called the Avesta. And what is the Khorda Avesta?
The Khorda is the short Avesta. Prayers were selected from the Avesta, and some new prayers were added for daily or family recitations. And they contain the gathas plus other prayers.
Is there any role for prayers in life?
Yes, I think there is. There are two essential functions. One is that a prayer is an expression of an individual person with religious feeling. It is the opening of the heart of that person to the spirit of the universe. Whether that be Aura Mazda or some other particular Yazata. It is an expression.
That's the thing that makes us receptive.
That's right.
To divine inspiration.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And it is an expression of that. The other thing, the standardized prayer rituals are something which are significant in a community because it binds the community. People come together to do a particular thing, to recite specific verses. And this has a binding communal force, and it also makes the people feel that this is the way we are bound to our ancestors who did these things, and we are maintaining that continuity, which is extremely important in a religious tradition.
So prayer is a spiritual glue in the social context.
In the social context, yes.
And at the same time, this glue acts as an opening of ourselves to the divine.
That's right, that's right.
So it's got a double function, a
yes.
personal and a social function.
Yes.
Except that when it becomes ritualized and magical, then it loses both functions.
And people don't understand what they're doing and just go through it as a kind of just a performance without cognitive sense, then I think it is already lost.
It becomes a discipline without presence.
That's right. That's right. I think I very much agree with that, yes.
In your view, what is the most important Zoroastrian prayer?
The prayers which are the so-called, the four fundamental prayers, I think three of them. The Yasau Vairyo, which is the declaration of the opening of the faith, I choose this religion. The Ashembo, which is the core of the faith, I'm committed to the life of Asha. And the one that comes at the end of the Gatha is the Airema Ishyo. The community of the faithful, that we share with each other the work of our good thoughts, and receive the benefits of the truth which comes from the good thoughts. And Zarathustra says, that is my wish. And I think these are the three most significant, individually as well as socially binding prayers. And then the gathas. If you have a little bit of understanding, not completely, I don't know anyone who, except for a few scholars who can completely understand the gathas. But after you've read them many times and you know some of the words, the key words, they become very meaningful.
Points of reflection and meditation.
Yes, a kind of meditation. I was surprised to find that myself.
An opening to the divine.
That's right. When I read them, there was a kind of an extraordinary calming effect on me.
Professor, what is the purpose of any initiation ceremony?
If there is a religious tradition, the initiation ceremony is to identify what the religious community is. The religious community is the community of the initiated. But
so it's sort of an acceptance criterion or an entry card into this?
Something like that, so that the community knows who the members of the community are, and the initiate knows in what group the person is, he or she is initiated. The initiate says, help me, O Ahura Mazda. I declare myself to be a follower, a worshipper of Ahura Mazda, following the teachings of Zarathustra.
So we follow the teachings of Zarathustra.
Right.
We are not a follower of Zarathustra per se, the person, but the follower of his teachings.
I think a public declaration by a believer, perhaps not going through the entire ceremony, but some kind of public declaration that I now declare myself to be a member of this religion, is, I think, worthwhile, because that enables the community to cohere.
So there's more value to this initiation than just joining a group.
Of course, of course.
It's actually adopting a way of life.
That's right, exactly, exactly.
So where I've been born, to which family, to which bloodline, to which race, to which country, matters not.
Absolutely not. Entirely irrelevant. It is the commitment of a thinking, choosing individual. It is the internal commitment which is the central, and the declaration to the community which is the next point. All rituals tend to become crystallized. This is addressed by Zarathustra to humanity. That means each individual human being. And I don't think there is any human being who has the right or the authority to deny this. And I can't imagine anyone having the indecency to say, you're declaring it, but I say this is not an acceptable declaration.
What has been the influence of Zoroastrianism on other world religions? And I'm just opening up a whole vast field here. And
well, let me make 3 points. One, this idea, the original Gothic idea of Asha as a value, as the ideal, independently existing, was an extraordinary innovation. And I think it filtered in through Anatolia into the Greek world, and then gradually became an integral part of Plato's philosophy, and had impact on the whole of Western thought.
And that is the notion that there is an ideal,
there is a
spiritual state or existence.
That's right, which exists independently of whether you have thought it or not. That is one, perhaps from my point of view, the most important. Then there is the notion of a last judgment and salvation, a notion of last judgment on each individual soul. This bridge of the separator business. It's not a judgment, but it is a kind of judgment. There are no pleas made for give me this or give me that, or forgive me or be merciful, no such thing. Merely a presentation. This is how I lived and these are the consequences. This did not exist around in the environments of Iran, and it influenced Judaism, early ancient Hebrew religion, where one died and lived as a kind of a shade in Sheol, and one wasn't sure what this existence was. But the idea of a judgment of God and a worthy place or an unworthy place influenced Jewish thought strongly.
So it brought a purpose to life.
That's right.
And when you say it influenced Judaism, we're talking around 500 BC, 1000 BC?
Maybe, no, between 600 and 500 BC.
At the time of the
Cyrus, the first impact, when the Ottomans met the rabbis of the exile. And when the exilic population went back with some of the leaders who then wrote prophetic books which were incorporated in the Old Testament, this material came in.
Is that the first time the concept of Messiah appears?
That is also a contribution that comes through Zoroastrianism, and it comes just a little bit later, but also a teacher who in teaching is also a savior.
That is the Messianic concept.
That's right, this one. And that's on the West. On the East...
One more question. How about the concept of, other than the judgment, how about the concept of the consequence of that judgment, heaven and hell?
Oh yes, the same. These, a worthy place or an unworthy place. And that was incorporated into Judaism.
And did Satan appear after Zoroastrianism?
And with this, then a little later, the idea of an evil, tricky, evil divinity who interfered with the welfare of human beings entered Judaism too.
So while previously there were trickster gods, there was no...
That's right. There was no particular central evil figure.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't know where to get this figure from. So finally they made him a fallen angel. An angel who was so depraved and corrupted by envy that he set up his own independent outfit in opposition to God.
The rebellious angel.
That's right.
And what about the influence on Islam?
The influence on Islam is not so much doctrinal as practical. The idea that the day religiously is divided into 5 periods, which was an old Iranian tradition. In Iran, every community was identified by the temple to which it was associated. Now I'm talking of the Sasanian period. And that there were many, many, many temples. There were hundreds of fire temples. And you were identified, you belong to this village. What does that mean? The village has a fire temple. If you were in a village which didn't have a fire temple, you didn't have the name of that village. You were then member of the village whose bell you heard.
Uh-huh.
So 5 times a day the bell would be rung. The ringing of the bell meant that this sound will now dispel evil. That's what they say. I don't think that was the original meaning. Somebody made it up. Now when Islam came, at some point there was this influence, and they said that there are 5 times of prayer during the day. And these 5 times reasonably match, not completely, the times of the Zoroastrian tradition. And they didn't have a bell, so they had a minaret, and the muezzin would go up there and make the announcement calling the faithful to prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this was a Persian tradition.
Okay, and finally, in today's world, in the 20th coming up to the 21st century world, as a Zoroastrian, what can we do?
Look for that which is flawed and strive to improve it. This puts enormous responsibility upon each one of us. There are so many things flawed all around us, and we can't go around doing this, but at least identify it, present it, bring it to the attention of people. I think one shouldn't be too much of a bore, but at least let people become aware of social and institutional flaws which need correction in such a way that they may be persuaded. Bring the greatest benefit one can produce is to transform the consciousness of individuals so that a good conscience arises in their minds. I really don't know how you can do that too successfully, but I try here and there.
Doesn't that make life too difficult, constantly looking for flaws?
It does. If you're going at it in an obsessive way, it would be very difficult. But when the opportunity arises, do it. But also appreciate the goodness of the world and the worthy things. And Zarathustra asks us that where this good world is flourishing, let us receive its benefits and be happy and be joyous. Responsibility is one thing, and the appreciation of goodness and joy is another. Both things are completely consistent. So live that way, and who knows, you may have ultimate content and satisfaction.
Professor Kaikhosrov Irani, thank you very much.
Thank you. I was happy to be here.